There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It is the exhaustion of constantly monitoring yourself, adjusting yourself, shrinking parts of yourself, without even realizing you are doing it. Some people move through life carrying tension that began so early they no longer recognize it as tension at all. They call it overthinking, perfectionism, sensitivity, or simply the way they are, without realizing these patterns were once survival strategies. Childhood wounds rarely announce themselves loudly in adulthood. More often, they appear quietly in the way someone apologizes too quickly, struggles to relax, fears disappointing people, or feels guilty for needing rest. When a child grows up in an emotionally unstable environment, the nervous system adapts automatically. It learns to stay alert, to read moods carefully, to avoid conflict before it starts, and to become whatever feels safest for the people around them. Over time, these adaptations stop feeling temporary and start feeling like identity. But these behaviors are not evidence that someone is weak, broken, or flawed. They are evidence that the mind learned how to survive in an environment where emotional safety was uncertain. And survival patterns do not disappear just because the danger is gone. They stay in the body, in relationships, in everyday habits, long after childhood ends. The important thing to understand is this: the exhaustion is not coming from who you are. It is coming from how long you have been carrying what you were never meant to carry alone. Some people explain themselves before anyone even asks for an explanation. They arrive 5 minutes late and immediately begin listing reasons. They say no to something small and suddenly feel pressured to justify every detail behind their decision. Even simple boundaries come wrapped in long paragraphs meant to soften disappointment before it has the chance to appear. From the outside, this can look like politeness or responsibility, but internally, it feels much deeper than that. It feels like protection. Because somewhere in the past, silence after expressing a need did not feel neutral. It felt dangerous. Many people who over-explain were raised in environments where emotions, preferences, or mistakes were not accepted easily. They learned that existing safely required constant justification, that having needs could trigger criticism, withdrawal, tension, or rejection. So the nervous system adapted. It learned to explain first, apologize quickly, and manage other people's reactions before they fully formed. Over time, this becomes automatic. The person is no longer consciously trying to avoid abandonment, yet their body still reacts as if misunderstanding could threaten connection. And beneath this pattern is often another wound that follows people quietly through adulthood: the belief that worth must be earned through productivity. For some people, productivity does not simply feel satisfying. It feels emotionally necessary. On productive days, there is temporary relief, a brief feeling that they are doing enough to deserve their place in the world. But the moment they stop, guilt appears almost immediately. Rest feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels undeserved. They sit down to relax and instead feel anxiety creeping in, as though they should be accomplishing something, fixing something, proving something. This pattern rarely begins in adulthood. It often starts in childhood environments where love, praise, or emotional attention were connected to achievement, usefulness, or being easy to manage. The child learns an invisible equation very early: worth equals performance. If they succeed, help, achieve, or avoid causing problems, connection feels safer. But if they rest too long, fail, or simply exist without producing something valuable, shame begins to surface. Over years, the nervous system stops separating productivity from survival. Work becomes more than ambition. Achievement becomes more than success. It becomes emotional protection. This is why some people can accomplish extraordinary things and still secretly feel inadequate. Their anxiety is not coming from laziness or lack of discipline. It is coming from a deeper fear that if they stop performing, they may stop being worthy of love, acceptance, or belonging altogether. Some people crave closeness more deeply than they know how to explain. They want to feel understood, chosen, emotionally safe with another person. They imagine connection constantly, replay conversations in their minds, and long for the feeling of finally being fully seen by someone who stays. But the moment that closeness begins to become real, something inside them shifts. They suddenly become distant, harder to reach, emotionally guarded. They stop replying with the same warmth. They begin questioning the relationship, focusing on flaws, or convincing themselves they need space. To the outside world, This behavior can look confusing or even contradictory. How can someone want intimacy so badly and still pull away from it the moment it appears? But internally, the nervous system is not experiencing closeness as purely safe. It is experiencing vulnerability and danger at the same time. For many people, emotional intimacy activates very old memories that were never fully processed. Somewhere earlier in life, being emotionally open may have led to disappointment, criticism, abandonment, unpredictability, or emotional neglect. The child learned that needing people deeply could hurt. That being fully known did not guarantee safety. In some cases, being emotionally visible even increased the risk of rejection. So the nervous system adapted the only way it knew how. It learned to move toward connection while simultaneously protecting against the possibility of loss. Psychologists often describe this as an approach avoidance attachment pattern. A person reaches for closeness because human beings naturally need connection, but as intimacy grows, self-protection begins to overpower openness. The closer someone gets, the more exposed the person feels. And exposure can awaken fears that are much older than the current relationship itself. This is why vulnerability sometimes triggers emotional withdrawal instead of comfort. The distancing is not manipulation. It is not a lack of care. It is protection. The nervous system is trying to solve two emotional needs that once felt impossible to hold together at the same time: the desire to be loved and the need to remain emotionally safe. People caught in this pattern often feel ashamed of themselves. They wonder why relationships feel exhausting, why they struggle to trust consistency, or why they keep pulling away from people they genuinely care about. But these reactions did not appear randomly. They were learned slowly through experiences that taught the brain to associate closeness with uncertainty. To be deeply known once carried emotional risk. So now the body stays alert, watching carefully for signs of disappointment, rejection, or abandonment, even when love is present. And this constant balancing act between connection and self-protection creates enormous emotional exhaustion. Part of them wants to stay open. Another part is preparing to survive being hurt again. The important thing to understand is that these patterns are not proof that someone is incapable of love. They are evidence of a nervous system that learned survival before it ever fully learned safety. Some people can immediately sense when someone else is uncomfortable, upset, overwhelmed, or emotionally distant. They notice changes in tone, facial expressions, silence, and energy almost automatically. They know how to make others feel safe, how to avoid conflict, how to adjust themselves to keep the emotional atmosphere stable. But when the attention turns inward and someone asks them a simple question like, "What do you need right now?" something unexpected happens. Their mind goes quiet. Not because nothing is wrong, but because they genuinely do not know how to answer. Many emotionally neglected children learned very early that their feelings, needs, or discomfort were not consistently noticed or responded to. Over time, the nervous system adapts to this absence by slowly disconnecting from internal signals altogether. The child stops checking what they feel because checking repeatedly and finding no emotional support becomes painful. Instead, they redirect all of that awareness outward. They become highly skilled at reading other people because survival depended on understanding the moods and needs around them. As adults, this often creates a strange imbalance. They can describe what everyone else needs with incredible accuracy, yet struggle deeply when asked what they themselves want, need, or feel. Even small decisions can become overwhelming because they were never taught that their inner world deserved attention. Questions like, "What would make you happy?" or "What do you need from this relationship?" It can feel unfamiliar, almost impossible to answer honestly. Emotional neglect does not always create obvious pain. Sometimes it creates disconnection. A person becomes so focused on managing external expectations that they slowly lose contact with themselves. This same disconnection often appears in another quiet but painful pattern: guilt around rest. For many people, stillness does not feel peaceful. It feels uncomfortable, irresponsible, or unsafe. They sit down to relax and immediately feel tension rising inside them. Their body tells them they should be doing something productive, helping someone, fixing something, or preparing for the next task. Rest becomes difficult because the nervous system no longer interprets stillness as safety. Somewhere earlier in life, being useful became emotionally tied to being lovable. Praise may have appeared more often when they were successful, easy to manage, helpful, or high-achieving. So the body learned a dangerous emotional equation. Usefulness creates connection, while rest risks rejection or worthlessness. Even as adults, this conditioning continues automatically. They keep moving not because they are driven purely by ambition, but because slowing down forces them to confront a painful fear beneath the surface. If they stop producing, who are they without performance? And if they are not constantly useful, will they still deserve love, care, or space in the lives of others? One of the quietest consequences of emotional pain is that the mind begins remembering hurt more clearly than love. Someone can tell you they care about you, support you, choose you again and again, and for a moment it feels real, comforting, almost enough. But then a small moment of rejection happens. A disappointed tone, a delayed reply, a subtle change in someone's energy, and suddenly that single moment feels heavier than every expression of love that came before it. This is not because people enjoy suffering or focus on negativity by choice. It is because the nervous system was trained to prioritize emotional danger long before it ever learned consistent safety. The human brain stores painful memories with stronger emotional intensity because survival depends more on remembering threats than remembering comfort. If childhood taught someone that connection could disappear unexpectedly, criticism could arrive suddenly, or affection could become inconsistent, the brain adapts by staying alert for signs that pain may happen again. Over time, people begin building an unconscious archive filled with moments of disappointment, embarrassment, rejection, failure, and emotional withdrawal. These memories stay vivid because the nervous system believes they contain important information for future survival. Positive experiences, on the other hand, often fade more quickly. Love feels temporary, safety feels uncertain, compliments are questioned, affection is doubted. The mind keeps searching for evidence that confirms the old fear that something will eventually go wrong. And when someone lives inside this emotional pattern for years, they slowly begin using that archive as proof of who they are. Every mistake becomes evidence of being unworthy. Every rejection feels permanent. Every painful memory quietly reinforces the belief that love is fragile and loss is inevitable. But this is where healing begins to matter, because these reactions are not fixed parts of someone's identity. They are learned survival responses, and what was learned can slowly be unlearned. The wounds are not proof that a person is broken. They are proof that the mind adapted to an environment that required constant emotional protection. Healing does not usually happen all at once through a dramatic transformation. More often, it begins through very small moments repeated consistently over time. It begins when someone rests without apologizing for it, when they allow themselves to need something without feeling guilty, when they stop explaining their emotions as though they must earn the right to feel them. It begins when a good moment happens, and instead of preparing immediately for loss, they allow themselves to stay present inside the happiness for a few seconds longer than before. Healing is the gradual process of teaching the nervous system that safety no longer has to be earned through exhaustion, performance, or self-protection. It is learning that being known does not always end in abandonment, that rest does not make someone worthless. That connection can exist without fear constantly standing beside it. And perhaps most importantly, healing is understanding that none of these patterns were created because someone was difficult to love. They were created because, for a long time, love did not feel safe enough to fully trust.